Well, Matt, to the Queen. Enjoying
Long
our
may
tea.
she live.
Yes.
Wait, I figure we have to drink tea.
Of course, yes, of course.
But like, the savage Americans we are, we've got tea bags in the cups.
I feel somewhat guilty about that. I know it's wrong.
I don't have any saucers
I
either.
don't like doing it. So,
My apologies.
yes. Well, Matt, as we drink our tea, I went to Manderley again last night.
Really?
Yes, to watch the 2020 Netflix film of Rebecca.
Oh.
It turned into a nightmare. Well, welcome to Deep Focus. I'm Nate.
And I'm Matt.
Tonight we are discussing Alfred Hitchcock's 1940 film, Rebecca. Kind of amazing to think this film is 80 years old.
That's incredible.
Does not feel like that watching it.
We'll be annoyingly slurping our tea throughout this, I'm sure.
I'm sure, yes. So you picked this movie for us to discuss here tonight.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I figure we need to delve into some older films. I think most of the films we've talked about here so far have been fairly modern, which is fine, but let's dip into the 1940s a little bit here. And of course, you mentioned the Netflix remake that just hit online.
Have you seen it?
I have not seen it.
You can skip it.
I figured it's... So Ben Wheatley, I think, was the director.
Yep.
I haven't seen any of his films. I know he's kind of
I saw Free Fire.
Free Fire,
I think that was the only one
High
of his.
Rise, Field in England. I'm familiar with his filmography. I just haven't had a chance to watch any of those
So
films.
I've seen now Rebecca and Free Fire. He's 0 for 2. I guess I can give one more, see if he wants to get a strikeout.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was actually really good to watch that version of it as well as to watch this again because this is one of my favorite Hitchcock films. I've loved it. As a matter of fact, for a long time, I argued this was his greatest work. I backed away from that. I'm in the Vertigo camp, maybe sometimes flirting with Shadow of a Doubt at this point. But I for a long time, I thought of this as his greatest work. And
It's the only one that won Best Picture.
yeah, it was his first American film as well. So he'd been a silent director and did some talkies in the 30s, but all in England, and then made his way over to the United States, brought over by the great David O. Selznick, one of the true moguls of the Hollywood system.
And he had just produced Gone with the Wind the year before.
Yep. So this was obviously at the height of his powers. And this is one of those films where you could kind of go, well, who's the real creative control over it? Hitchcock clearly has his stamp on it, but Selznick also has his stamp on it. So it might not be thought of as the quintessential Hitchcock film. It's not The Wrong Man. It's not some of those tropes that we see in a lot of his other work.
I see this still as very informed by his days in England, right? It's very much in that vein, in that style. He hasn't really come into his own in terms of just his American style pictures.
Well, it's a funny thing to be his first American film, but it's set in England.
Yeah.
It has a British cast. I mean,
it feels like a British production.
It absolutely does. So you wouldn't think of it as an American film at all when you watch it. But it is just, I think, such a classy film. I think that's when I was watching this compared to the Ben Wheatley version that just came out. You just understand how important class is. There's a glamour in this movie that simply does not exist anymore. Part of it's because of just the kinds of actors and the kinds of crew that you had at that time. They were trained differently. And they were more complete performers and more complete people.
And just the style of acting, too, the style of lighting, of course, the camera work. But yeah, it's the craft here is pretty impeccable. Just the meticulous lighting, the framing, the use of sets, even the use of miniatures is really neat here. The opening is entirely
Some
miniature.
of those miniatures, I mean, I would not have guessed. When the big driving up to Manderley, right? I would not think that's a miniature shot.
It looks great.
Some of it's just as bad. I mean, you see the backstage stuff. It's 50 feet long, and the doors were a foot tall. I mean, just that was the way you just did movie magic back then, and it works. It works wonderfully.
Yeah, there are a couple shots later with
some of the rear projection.
Gets
it doesn't
a little
work
dodgy.
well. Yep. And it's not even just like sometimes you look at old films, you go, well, it's 80 years old, right?
Yeah.
I mean, special effects of then aren't going to always hold up as well. But even by the standards of that time, it still is a little lackluster on some of that.
A little bit, but it's fine. You know, it works. Well, the story is...
It's a ghost story.
It is a ghost story.
That's how it was pitched to me when I first saw it. I was like, oh, it's a ghost story. Ooh. And then I realized there's nothing supernatural about it.
No.
And I was like, this is not what I
it's-
expected. But it was actually much better than I expected.
Yeah, it's very much about the character that is not there.
Yeah,
right?
the
So
title
the
character.
namesake of the-
Rebecca is dead before the movie begins, and our lead, our heroine, does not even get a name. That's what's so fascinating about it.
Yeah, she's just called Woman, right?
Mrs. DeWitt, right?
Or I mean, in the I was referring
In the
to
script, so it's
the
funny. 'Cause
newest version. I think she's just called Woman.
I believe so, yes. In this one, the script referred to her as I. They had toyed with the possibility of giving her a name. Some thought of Ivy, and then I think they eventually just went with the novel. Daphne du Maurier novel does not have a character name for her, and so they kept that. And I think it's a great decision not to have the name, because it does give the sense of this unseen force of Rebecca being overshadowing, that she is so much in control of this woman's life that she doesn't even get to name,
Yeah.
have her own name. But the story starts with this simple enough. They're in Monte Carlo. She is the assistant, the kind of unwed, simple assistant to a wealthy lady who is traveling and happens to meet at this time Maxim de Winter, played by Laurence Olivier, and one of his better screen performances.
Mr. DeWitter's having some coffee with me. Go and ask the stupid waiter for another cup.
I'm afraid I must contradict you. You shall both have coffee with me. Garçon, coffee, please.
Cigarette?
No, thank you.
You know, I recognized you just as soon as you came in, though I haven't seen you since that night at the casino at Palm Beach. Perhaps you don't remember an old woman like me. Are you playing the tables much here at Monte?
No, I'm afraid that sort of thing ceased to amuse me years ago.
So the setup is pretty quick and pretty effective.
Efficient.
And, yeah, it's efficient, and they have this whirlwind romance, but all the while Maxim is very preoccupied. You can tell he's had a great loss in his life, which is revealed that his wife had recently passed. And Joan Fontaine, of course, plays his love interest here. And her performance is pretty remarkable.
Especially considering how nobody wanted her or liked her in the part.
That,
but she's great in it.
She's great, but she has a real beautiful arc in this film. I mean, those first scenes when you meet her, she seems so childlike and so naive.
He had a theory that if you should find one perfect thing or place or person, you should stick to it. Do you think that's very silly?
Not at all. I'm a firm believer in that myself. And what did you find to do with yourself while he was painting his tree?
Well, I sat with him and I sketched a little. I don't do it very well, though.
And so immature and inexperienced, clearly, with any kind of relationship.
And partly it's accomplished through her costume design, right? Her costume's very plain,
Yep.
high collars, I mean, there's just a lot of visual
very
cues
modest.
that tell us who she is. And then she, of course, complements that with her performance, right? She's a little clumsy and awkward in her speaking. They do play the clumsy element to kind of show that inadequacy for her,
Yeah.
in terms of being in this land of the well-to-do, that she does not really belong there, right?
Yeah, and she doesn't really know what she's getting into, right? So she's infatuated. She feels that she's in love. And you do feel like the love she has for Max is genuine here. And not it may have started as a childish infatuation, but it seems to grow into something very real throughout the film. But she's thrust into this world of high society that she's completely unprepared for. Granted, her employer in the beginning is someone that lives in that world, but that's still a very new job to her. She's just not used to the dynamics and the politics they're in. And of course, when they get to Mandalay, she knows that the absence of Rebecca remains, continuing to loom large in such a way that becomes very overwhelming very quickly.
Well, so most of the Mandalay is in of itself a character in this film, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of two of the biggest characters are not even people on the screen, right?
No.
The dead wife, and then the estate. Mandalay is the estate where Maxim lives, and you get this wonderful introduction to it. Obviously, very beginning of the film, you're going to it, you're seeing it in ruins, but then You go to it to her first experience of it, and it's such a wonderful introduction to the sets, and then to the supporting cast. You see that there's this whole staff there that exists to serve the state, but very quickly most of them will fade away, and Mrs. Danvers will be our lead antagonist for the film. And her introduction is so well done. The performance, the costume design are just absolutely excellent, and how she just kind of materializes. We have this wide shot, and you don't see her in that shot. And then you go in later on to this close-up, and she just kind of enters into the screen.
Yeah, she is very ghost-like in this film, right? She seems to be really the primary agent of haunting, I guess, in the estate, right? Yeah. And she's the personification of Rebecca in many ways.
I'd like to know if you approve of the menu.
Oh, well, I'm sure it's very suitable, very, very nice indeed.
You'll notice, madam, that I've left a blank space for the sauce. Mrs. De Winter was most particular about sauces.
Let's have whatever you think that Mrs. De Winter would have ordered.
It's one of the highlights of the film is Judith Anderson's performance as Mrs. Danvers, right? So it's great acting all around. The two principal leads, of course, but she, for the supporting cast, really is just an excellent person. And of course, there's many other small parts too, but she, I think, is the most indelible of them all. She just really makes a mark upon you.
Yeah, she's wonderfully cold, right? And clearly very obsessive.
You're intimidated by her.
Yeah, yeah. And you really get the feeling of she's really carrying not only the weight of Rebecca's death on her shoulders, but just the weight of the estate and what it used to be and what she wants it to be. And there's an incredible amount of depth to her performance, and you just get this real sense of history that's really crushing down on Joan Fontaine's character.
Right. Yeah, because it's one of those things that I think this film does so well is that it gives us a lot of a sense of atmosphere. And it accomplishes it through the cinematography. It's Academy Award-winning cinematography, gorgeous black and white, wonderful compositions, wonderful camera movements. This is back when movies didn't have the kind of quick pace of editing.
Yeah.
So you have shots here that can last 2 to 3 minutes at times, and they're never visually boring. Hitchcock was great at how to frame a shot. And he actually slowed down. His earlier work is a little bit more fast-paced in this in terms of the editing. It was at Selznick's insistence that he slowed down and did longer takes.
Because Selznick, I think, ultimately edited this, correct?
And he even reshot some of it, right?
Yeah.
There's some scenes that we're watching that weren't directed by Hitchcock, that were directed later on by Selznick. But it's still, I think, a fantastic exercise of who Hitchcock was and how he did develop some of his language later on once he did really move into Hollywood and become a studio director, mostly with Universal following this. But he did do, I think, some really clever things. Perhaps it's worth just jumping in a little bit more to the story here. We have these different events that take place where we have clearly the fact that Maxim is removed from his wife, and we don't really understand why. And then you have Joan Fontaine being just constantly put upon by the events around her, right? The people around her. So it's very efficient in terms of it introduces things very fast, but it also then kind of slows down a little bit where once we get to Manderley, it does just kind of become a sequence of where she's inadequate. But what does take an interesting turn is when George Sanders shows up in a very good performance, kind of a comedic but dastardly.
I hear he went up to London, left his little bride all alone. It's too bad. Are you rather afraid that somebody might come down and carry you off?
Danny, all your precautions were in vain. The mistress of the house was hiding behind the door.
Very quickly we can intuit that this was a lover of Rebecca, right? That Rebecca had a lover. And that's kind of one of the things that's kind of neat, just this era that these aren't spelled out because they couldn't be because of the production code.
But it's not really subtle at all, though.
No, it's just that for an intelligent audience member, you're going to be able to pick up on all of these things. But it just goes to show how you don't need to show as explicitly a lot of what is shown.
Wait, even Mrs. Danvers, I think, clearly has some...
Was there an actual lesbian relationship?
At least...
It certainly seems like she was into it, if it was.
Yeah, she seems very connected to Rebecca in ways that aren't explicitly described on screen.
Feel this. It was a Christmas present from Mr. De Winter. He was always giving her expensive gifts, the whole year round. I keep her underwear on this side.
And you come to a point where she has this this ball that she's going to throw. This is part of her. You get that midway point. She's going to reassert herself.
You sent for me, madam.
Yes, Mrs. Danvers. I want you to get rid of all these things.
These are Mrs. De Winter's things.
I am Mrs. De Winter now.
It's just a wonderful thing where she asserts herself against Mrs. Danvers.
It's kind of the one scene she really does that so strongly, which is interesting. It comes a lot earlier in the film than you think.
Yeah, it's not the climax, which you would think. It's like, I am now the woman of the house, and I am going to take control. It's right in the middle, but then it's followed up by this very devastating scene where she's now going to throw the party for this ball and show herself as the real woman of the house. And she's been led by Mrs. Danvers to dress in this gown and have this bit built. And I just love it because I still remember so clearly the first time I saw this film, I was probably in middle school. I was probably like 12, 13 years old.
Yeah.
And watching her approach and the way the camera tracks with her and the way it just holds on her, and you're getting ready for her to reveal this. And I just was so taken away with it. The costume is so wonderful. And then to have DeWitt turn around, see her, and be devastated by it, and then her face all of a sudden drain.
What the devil do you think you're doing?
Becca. But it's the picture, the one in the gallery. What is it? What have I done?
Go and take it off. Doesn't matter what you put on, anything will do.
And that's where Mrs. Danvers' treachery is kind of fully on display, right? And one scene that I realize this film is over the top from a dramatic standpoint, and it's just kind of the nature of films of that time. But the scene where she's encouraging...
It's like almost like a Danielle Steele of its own age, right?
Yeah. But the scene where Mrs. Danvers is encouraging Joan Fontaine's suicide, always struck me as just a bit too much. Like I don't.
She's going for broke. That scene, right? She's feeling bad. I'm ready to throw her out the window.
I'm very doubtful that the character was at the point of suicide just because of this one event. But
I buy it. I buy it because it wasn't just this one event, right? Because she's had the humiliation of she broke the porcelain, right? She's had the humiliation.
It feels a little forced to me.
But she's constantly feeling inadequate and being told she's inadequate. Before she even meets Maxim, she's got that feeling.
That's true.
She has no family, right? So it does feel like that. Like, I can't live up to this. I'm being engulfed by this, by Rebecca. I'm being engulfed by her.
Well, kind of like what I was saying, the film is just over the top dramatically in general. So in that sense, I suppose it's fine. But it just... for some reason, it just still feels a bit forced, a bit accelerated to me in terms of where her character was at that point. But it's a small nitpick.
You thought you could be Mrs. De Winter, live in her house, walk in her steps, take the things that were hers, but she's too strong for you. You can't fight her.
You then get the sense, okay, something's a little more dastardly, and they're really kind of trying to mess with her.
Yeah.
And she tries to assert herself. This leads to the scene where then Mrs. Danvers destroys her in the public setting, and she's about ready to go, which then totally turns the trajectory yet again, because we then learned what happened to Rebecca in a very long scene, almost 10 minutes long.
It's a long scene in the boathouse,
but it doesn't feel long.
No, there's a lot of exposition, but the performances carry it.
And the camera work.
Yeah.
Rebecca has won. Her shadow has been between us all the time, keeping us from one another. She knew that this would happen.
What are you saying?
They sent a diver down. He found another boat.
Yes, I know. Frank told me. Rebecca's boat. Oh, it's terrible for you. I'm so sorry.
The diver made another discovery. He broke one of the ports and looked into the cabin. There was a body in there.
And she wasn't alone. There was someone sailing with her. And you have to find out who it was. That's it, isn't it, Maxim?
You don't understand. There was no one with her. It's Rebecca's body lying there on the cabin floor.
Yeah, and then at this point, the film really turns into a courtroom drama in some ways.
Which I would not have expected.
Yeah.
For a ghost story.
No, I guess the court scene itself is fairly brief, but it continues in that back room of the pub. It's essentially a continuation of the courtroom. And that's where the film, you could say the film kind of loses steam toward the end, but at least on paper, but it's carried by the direction, by the performances. And it's eventually revealed that Rebecca basically died accidentally, right?
Yeah.
Maxim and her had a fight.
That's the story he tells. I mean, we kind of believe his story, but so that was a compromise they made because in the novel he murders her.
Yeah.
And the production code would not allow them to have him murder and get away with it.
Sure.
So they had to make this accommodation for that purpose. But I do like the fact that it's just him, and there's enough mystery, and Olivier's performance is frequently showing that he's not exactly a good man, right?
I suppose that's why you married me. Because you knew I was dull and gauche and inexperienced, and there could never be any gossip about me.
Gossip? What do you mean?
I don't know. I just said it for something to say. Don't look at me like that.
He's very content with getting away with it, right? And that's really his intent throughout the film. I mean, even before it's revealed that Rebecca, had cancer and was going to die anyway, kind of thing. He's clearly very relieved by that. But even before then, you just get the sense that he almost feels that her death, even though he may have been involved in some capacity, was justified because of what she put him through. And that's not...
he calls her the devil, right?
Yeah, there's questionable ethics going on here, but that's fine. It probably is more realistic in that way. I never felt like his character was supposed to be this paragon of virtue. Even from the opening, he seems to be quite content kind of brushing off other people. I mean, he belittles Joan Fontaine's character actually fairly regularly in the beginning of the film.
That's one of the great things that was this film. How it portrays their relationship is fascinating because he's clearly not interested in having a wife. He even tells her that explicitly, "Don't become my wife," right?
Yeah.
Even as he proposes to her. But notice how it's staged. When he proposes, he's in the bathroom. She's out in the rest of the apartment.
I repeat what I said. Either you go to America with Mrs. Van Hopper, or you come home to Mandalay with me.
You mean you want a secretary or something?
I'm asking you to marry me, you little fool.
Well, the proposal is kind of out of necessity, just to prevent her from leaving.
Right, but it's like it's kind of a fascinating. He's not really committed to her, and he wants, and she's even timid. Like it's expert staging there because the bed is very much featured in that proposal scene.
Yeah.
And you could think of just like go back to 1940, how that in itself, like a woman who's not married to a man is in his actual bedroom, and he's kind of in his pajamas a little bit.
It's kind of scandalous that she just ran up there, sort of thing.
Yeah, so for us today, we might not appreciate it. I think audiences might miss out on some of those details now, but it's very clearly kind of a risque scene for its time, especially. But the way they play with it, like that bed, she kind of gets close to it at certain points, so but then she kind of retreats away from it at points in time. So it's really just cool direction and staging that takes place, and that plays out through almost all of their relationship. He's not very affectionate towards her. She's kind of clinging to him. He kisses her on the forehead almost like you would a little girl. He doesn't embrace her like a wife.
It's not until really toward the end of the film. I mean, when her arc is complete, her performance very much sheds that childlike quality.
Maxim, I'm worried about what you'll do at the inquest tomorrow.
What do you mean?
You won't lose your temper, will you? Promise me that they won't make you angry.
All right, darling. I promise.
No matter what he asks you, you won't lose your head.
and that's a credit to Joan Fontaine's ability here. I think she was like in her early 20s when she did this film, so a pretty extraordinary talent at this point. And yeah, by the end, she really does seem like Mrs. De Winter, right? I mean, she seems to have embraced that role in a mature way, and the kind of fiery conclusion of the film reflects that further. So, just a great arc, to her character and to her performance.
Yeah. One of the things I really like about her performance is that I think she's vulnerable and she's accessible for us as an audience. We're rooting for her, but she's not like stupid and
sorry, make sure you edit that out. String went right in my mouth.
Oh, it's staying in. This is why the British do not drink with tea bags in their tea, Matt.
I know, yeah.
This is why I'm being accommodating as your guest right now.
That was a faux pas.
We should have taken them out. I was about to ask before we started recording to take them out, but
yeah, well.
I didn't. I regret it now.
Okay. As you should.
So back to our movie. So
yes.
Joan Fontaine's performance. I was smitten with her when I first saw this. I just was smitten with her because she is very much girl next door, and you're rooting for her, and you really want her to find happiness. You want her to find that person she can hold on to because she's such a sympathetic character. Her family's all dead. They've all died in a very short time. And so you just kind of say, yes, you want her to find happiness. And so you root for her, and she gives you that, very much that anchor, but without being either too strong that you go, well, why isn't she just standing up to Mrs. Danvers? But without being so weak that you can't believe that she's going to be able to make this transition either, right? That's not an easy thing to pull off as a performer.
Oh, no, that's worse. What does Maxim say about it? Does he like it like that? Well, he never mentions it. Oh, well, don't go by me. I can see by the way you dress you don't care a hoot how you look. But I wonder Maxim hasn't been at you. He's so particular about clothes. I don't think he ever notices what I wear.
So it was a hugely popular film, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Oscars and commercially, it was a big success.
Yeah, it's one that you don't really think about when you think about Hitchcock, which is unfortunate because I really do think it's one of his best films. And everyone talks about The Birds and Psycho and Vertigo, and as they should, but maybe not The Birds. But
you don't like Tippi Hedren? Is that?
Well, that's another conversation. But this belongs on the short list, I think, of his greatest pictures, and it's nice that hopefully it'll get a little more attention because of the new remake. But I bet you a lot of people won't even realize this version exists.
No, but it's certainly, just comparing it to that remake, it's incredible how much better this film is. Okay. I mean, I loved this film before, and I've shown it to a lot of people over the years. Just some of our peers, people that are roughly our age, some people a little even younger than us now, because we're getting to be middle-aged men. But it always plays well. Yeah. I don't find anybody who's bored by it. Yeah. I mean, I get that, yes, most of your kids today are going to be bored by this film. Because
it actually is fairly long,
Yeah, it's 130 minutes.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel it. And I think anybody who's into movies should see this film, especially if you want to introduce people to pre-war, I guess is right in the war.
Early war, at least in England.
Pre-American involvement in World War II, but right in the thick of it for Europe. This is certainly a magnificent work of art and wonderfully, wonderfully made.
Yeah.